Um, Good evening, everyone. Kalisperasis. What can I say? There's never a dull day in our COVID world. I hope you're all well and keeping safe. Firstly, let me say going forward for at least the next 6 weeks until the middle of July, most of our seminars will be online, not only because of existing developments, but also because our speakers are not local, they're either based interstate or overseas. We will then be reviewing the situation in mid-July. And for those who had booked for the Vases Songs of Freedom concert this Saturday evening, there's been an announcement today that it won't be proceeding for obvious reasons. Difficult to ascertain at this point if there'll be a rescheduled event or a rescheduled date, as many things are being deferred. But either way, notifications will go out by the community. Let's now turn to tonight's seminar, which has been 3 years in the making. Why do I say that? Because constantly it's been deferred due to extraneous circumstances. However, today we've been very adamant that rain, hail, snow, or COVID, the show will go on. In this respect, we're grateful to have Dr. Gillian Shepherd from Trobe University with us online, and this topic is the Tomb of the Diver, Life, Death, and Drinking in the Ancient Greek World. The Tomb of the Diver is a 5th century BC grave found outside the Greek city of Poseidonia in South Italy. Poseidonia was probably founded around 600 BC by Greek colonists from Sybaris along the Gulf of Taranto, and had become a flourishing town by 540 BC, judging from its temples. Sybaris itself was founded by Dorian colonists from the regions of Achaia and Argolidos in the Peloponnese. Sometime before 400 BC, the city came under the domination of the Lucanians, an indigenous Italic people, after which its name changed to Pestum. The painted internal walls of the discovered tomb depict a convivial scene of a symposium, or a ritualised Greek drinking party. The speaker tonight will elaborate on what is this extraordinary scene of drinking and festivity tell us about attitudes to life, death, and the afterlife of the people living in Poseidonia at the time. A few words on our speaker tonight, Dr. Gillian Shepherd. Gillian studied classics and fine arts at the University of Melbourne before going to complete a PhD in classical archaeology at Trinity College in Cambridge, followed by a research fellowship at St. Hugh's College in Oxford. Presently, she's a lecturer in Ancient Mediterranean Studies and director of the AD Trendall Research Centre for Ancient Mediterranean Studies at Trobe University. Her research interests include the ancient Greek colonisation of Sicily and Italy, burial customs, the archaeology and art of Greece and Magna Graecia. Welcome, Gillian. The floor is yours. Take us away. Great to have you on now.
Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you to all of you for coming, particularly in these circumstances. As Nick says, this has been something of a doomed talk. It's had to be postponed twice already, and we had a near miss today as Melbourne heads back into lockdown. But thanks to technology, we don't have to cancel it a third time. So today, what I want to do is take you from Melbourne on the brink of lockdown to Poseidonia, or Paestum as it's more commonly known today, in southern Italy, to look at an absolutely extraordinary painted tomb. And this is the Tomb of the Diver, which dates to the 5th century BC. And just have a think about what it might tell us about life, death, and generally having a good time in antiquity, particularly with its scenes of a drinking party and possible references to death and the afterlife. First, though, as Nick said, I'm the director of the Trendall Centre, which is a research centre at the Trobe University. And it's a research centre that was founded through a very generous bequest from somebody called Dale Trendall. And I'd like to introduce you to Dale Trendall, first of all, in case you're not already familiar with him, because, not least, I'm going to show you some of the vases in his antiquities collection, and also he was very fond of the site of Paestum or Poseidonia. Now, can you see the slides there? If I move them on, there we are. Okay, so there we have the tomb of the diver, and if I just move on to introduce you to, and it's not moving on for some reason. Here we go. There we go. Okay, so you're looking here at a picture of Arthur Dale Trendall, or Dale Trendall as he was known. He was the first and indeed only resident fellow at the Trobe University. And when he died, he bequeathed his library, his small personal antiquities collection, and also his archive of around 40,000 photographs to the Trobe University. And these photographs they're museum photographs of red figure vases that were produced not in Athens, but in southern Italy and Sicily, using similar techniques, and mainly during the 4th century BC. And Dale Trendall was an expert on these vases. And his love of these vases and his lifetime's work really started in 1932, when he went to Italy for the first time and saw the magnificent remains of the Greek cities there in southern Italy. So here you're looking at a plan of southern Italy and Sicily, which shows the areas of Greek settlement. The Greeks, of course, started settling around mainly the coastal areas in this part of the world from about the middle of the late 8th century BC onwards. And they created what we now often refer to today as Magna Graecia, or Megale Hellas, Greater Greece. So a really important area of ancient Greek culture and antiquity, and also home to some of the most prosperous and powerful Greek city-states in the ancient world. Now, Trendall, when he visited this area, was particularly struck by the site of Poseidonia, Paestum, which you can see up here, not too far from Naples in Italy. And it was founded as the Greek settlement of Poseidonia, or the city of Poseidon, towards the end of the 7th century BC. And as Nick has said, it then came under Lucanian control, the Lucanians being the indigenous Italian population in that area. It came under Lucanian control in the 4th century. Doesn't seem to have changed too much, though. Life seems to have continued pretty much as normal. And then the Romans gained control of it in 273 BC, and that's when its name got changed to Paestum, which, as I say, is the name it's generally referred to as today. Now, like many ancient Greek cities in Sicily and southern Italy, Paestum flourished, and a really good sign of that are the magnificent Greek temples there. And if you haven't ever visited Poseidonia or Paestum, I really recommend you do. You're looking here at just one of the remaining 3 temples. This is the Temple of Athena, used to be known as the Temple of Ceres, and it dates to about 500 BC. And as you can see, it's extremely well preserved. And Paestum or Poseidonia, along with some other Greek city-states, produced red figure pottery. As I said, very similar to the sort of stuff that was being produced in Athens, but nevertheless distinctive enough that we can tell the differences. And it was this sort of thing. This is actually a piece from the Trendall collection, and it's known as a libes gamikos, which is a vessel used, we think, particularly for ritual purposes, water for ritual bathing, bridal baths, that kind of thing. As you can see, it's quite an extravaganza. The Greeks in southern Italy often didn't hold back with their decoration. And it's this sort of thing that Dale Trendall made his life's study. he would attribute these vases to individual painters, to individual hands, by analysing the decoration on them. And this particular one he attributed to the Aphrodite painter. We rarely know the real names of these people, so this is a made-up name, the Aphrodite painter, and dated it to about 330 BC. Now, the vases that Dale Trendle studied usually come from cemeteries, and that's simply because cemeteries, graves, that's really the one place where an ancient vase is likely to survive in one piece, or at least reasonably intact, all the bits there. Which brings us to the cemeteries of Paestum and the tomb of the diver. Now, here you're looking at a plan of the cemeteries as they surround ancient Poseidonia or Paestum. As is absolutely conventional, they are outside the city area for an ancient city, and they're represented by those big orange dots of various sizes. They reflect the size of the cemetery. And they include the one that's further south, this cemetery here, I beg your pardon, known as Tempo del Prete, which you might be able to just see here. And that is where, in 1968, this extraordinary find was made of La Tumba del Tuffatore, the tomb of the diver. Now, this cemetery here, Tempo del Prete, has graves in it dating to between the 6th and 4th centuries BC. And most of these are fairly standard types for this period at Poseidonia or Paestum. In other words, they're rectangular trenches that are cut in the bedrock and they are lined with stone slabs. They're fairly plain. There's not a lot to distinguish one grave from the other until we get to the tomb of the diver, which is really very, very different from anything else, not just in this cemetery, but the whole site, and indeed, arguably, the whole of the Greek world. So this is a diagram just to show you what this tomb looks like. So you get a sense of how the different pieces of it fit together. The painting is on the interior of the tomb, but otherwise it's basically this standard sort of format for this area. In other words, it's slabs of stone that are set into a rectangular cutting in the bedrock. But in this case, painted internally, and then there's another slab at the top there, it's raised, that is the lid, and it also had the image on the inside. And of the very scanty skeletal remains in this tomb, they were identified as being those of an adult male. But it is this painted interior that really makes this tomb absolutely extraordinary. So let's just have a look at that. So here is this painted lid. And as you can see, it's what gives the tomb its name. It shows a diver leaping from some kind of tower or wall. It looks like a built structure there into what appears to be some body of water. And then there are a couple of kind of rather weedy, spindly looking trees on either side. And the whole scene is in a sort of a frame that has got palmettes at the corners. Now then on the inside, and here you're looking at two of the long sides, we have a symposium scene. In other words, a scene of men reclining on couches at the symposium, which was, of course, a really rather ritualised male drinking party that on the whole women did not attend. And what is also very important about this scene, though, is not just what it shows us about a symposium, because we're fairly familiar with these sort of scenes, particularly from Athenian vase painting, but the fact that we have large-scale painting here on a flat surface and in different colours. This is not vase painting, this is wall painting. Now, we know that wall painting did exist as a major art in the ancient Greek world, especially in Athens in the 5th century onwards. Athens seems to have been quite a centre for this art form, and we know of famous paintings that were publicly exhibited in Athens. We know the subjects of the paintings, we know the names of the men who painted them. We even have found remnants of the buildings in which they were displayed, but nothing survives of the paintings themselves. So this tomb, even though it's a long way away from Athens and it's a small tomb buried in the ground, not a major public building, nevertheless, it gives us quite critical information about what is going on in terms of techniques and styles in wall painting. So then if we move on to the short sides, which you're looking at here to get a sense of them, it's also still part of the symposium scene. Fairly recently, the paint and plaster in this tomb have been chemically analysed to find out exactly what the pigments and ingredients are. And those results were compared with plaster and paintwork found elsewhere in Peaston, particularly from the 5th century temples. And there's a fairly close match. So it seems pretty clear that this painted tomb was locally produced using local workshops, local suppliers of raw materials, and quite possibly local artisans also. And that is kind of what we'd expect, but this is such a weird find. It's so unusual that we couldn't really be sure. Now, inside, there was not much in the way of grave goods. You're looking at them here. There were some fragments of an arabellos, a little perfume vessel, also some fragments of tortoise shell and some corroded pieces of metal. You can see those on the right. I'll get to those in a minute. But for the moment now, concentrate on the image of the vase on the left, which is an Athenian black glaze lekithos decorated with palmettes on the shoulder. And it's really this that gives the date for the tomb. This can be dated quite precisely to around 480 to 470 BC. So that's where we get this specific date from. Now, a lekithos is a vessel used for oil, and it's a fairly standard sort of tomb offering in many places in this period, including Athens and, of course, Poseidonia. And, of course, it was the oil in this lekithos that would have been the actual offering. Now, sometimes we see these sort of lekithoi in another technique, what is often known as the white ground technique, where you get a very pale whitish background and often coloured decoration on it. And you're looking at one here from Athens. And this is fairly typical of these things in that they quite often show funeral-related scenes. And in this case, you've got a couple who appear to be visiting a tomb, a woman on the right and a man on the left. And this white ground technique was not very, how shall I put it, wasn't really dishwasher proof. It doesn't stand up to a lot of wear and tear. So vases decorated with this technique are not really suitable for everyday use. And we think, particularly when we see these funerary ones, that they were possibly made specifically to go in the tomb. But once again, it's the oil in the lekithos that is really the offering, but it's the pot that remains for us today. Now, if you look at these two who are visiting the tomb, if we look at some of the details, there is the woman on the right, and you can see she's got a lekithos in her hand, so it's kind of very self-referential, a lekithos on a lekithos. And if you look at the man on the left, he's holding a lyre, and if you look very closely at that lyre, you can see it's been made with a tortoise shell as a sounding box. So this is probably explaining for us those fragments of metal and tortoiseshell in the tomb. It's what's left of a musical instrument, a lyre, that was placed in the tomb of the diver also. Now, as I said, it was really the oil in these vases that was the offering, and that could be quite expensive. That meant that the occupant of the tomb of the diver got quite a nice grave offering there. But sometimes when we look a bit more closely at these lekythoi, there is something distinctly fishy going on with them. Not in the case of the lekythos in the tomb of the diver, but with some others. Now, here's one that has been x-rayed. And if you look at that closely, you can see that it is not completely empty and hollow on the inside. There is, in fact, a bag of clay here that prevents any oil going into the main body of the lekythos here. And here's a broken one that shows you this bag of clay. So what this meant was that you didn't have to put nearly so much oil, of this expensive oil, into your lekythos. You just had to put in a little bit. It would look full, it would feel heavy, it would look like you were giving great auntie a splendid send-off, but you would not have had to have spent so much money on this particular grave offering. And I just love this, because this is where I really feel that nothing's changed since antiquity. You can see the ancient mind working in exactly the same one as the modern one. You know, how can we put on a show but save some money at the same time? Now, these are not, though, in fact, that common, but I will show you how to detect them. If you look closely at usually the shoulder area of one of these lekythoi, you will see they have a little hole in them. That is because the air in between the bag and the main body of the lekythos must be allowed to escape during the firing process. Otherwise, it'll get so hot in the kiln that the lekythos will explode. So they always have this little hole in them to prevent that. Okay, so let's now work our way around the party scene in this tomb. Here I'm going to start with the short side that shows either the arrival or the departure of a guest. You can see the guy on the left is wearing his outdoor clothes. He's got a cloak on, a garment, and he's got his outdoor staff. But the guy on the right is very scantily clad indeed, which was perfectly fine for a symposium. In fact, almost the uniform for a symposium. And there is a smaller figure there who, it's a bit hard to tell whether it's male or female, generally described as female, a flautist who is piping these two in or out. Now, where are they exactly? They're obviously either arriving or departing the symposium. It's debated. I always feel that it's more arriving, but we can get onto that a bit later. But what seems to be created here with these characters and also the people reclining on the couches is the space of the symposium is recreated literally in this tomb. In other words, everybody is arranged around the borders of the tomb and they're reclining on couches, klinae in ancient Greek, in what would be known in an ancient Greek household as the andron, the sort of, if you like, the men's room where these male sort of entertainments would take place. Now, the andron is a room that we think we can identify archaeologically as the smart room in a house where these symposia would take place. Now, you're looking at quite a good example here that was found at the site of Olynthus in northern Greece. It dates to the 4th century BC. And Olynthus was destroyed, pretty much razed to the ground in the 4th century by Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father. And that was very unfortunate for the inhabitants of Olynthus, but is quite convenient for us today because the site is extremely well preserved and provides some of our best evidence for ancient Greek houses as opposed to public buildings. And a lot of these houses have this andron arrangement in them. So what you have here is an entrance to the house, and then you've got another doorway here into quite a smart room. It's a bit hard to make out, but there is in fact a mosaic in that area, just preserved. Also a mosaic at the entrance. And then around the edges of the room would be arranged these clinae, these couches, head to toe, where the symposium guests would recline. And of course, there's no need to go to expensive mosaic under couches where you wouldn't be able to see it. Now, what you might also notice is the off-centre doorway here. You can see this wall here is shorter than this wall here. Now, this is always the dead giveaway of some kind of andron or dining room in ancient Greece, because the ancient Greeks did not like things that were off-centre or lopsided or top-heavy in some way. So when you get something that's off-centre, there's usually a good reason for it. And in this case, if you imagine those clinae, those couches arranged head to toe, if you had a central doorway, then you would end up with a couch halfway across the doorway. So you have to have it off-centre to accommodate those couches. So next time you're at an ancient Greek site and you see an off-centre doorway, ask yourself, is it some kind of dining room or not? Now, these sorts of rooms for these parties could be quite lavishly decorated. We've got quite a nice mosaic here, but we get quite an entertaining anecdote about Digenes, the 4th century philosopher, contained in a work by Galen, the Protrepikos, which you might know Galen is a 2nd century AD Greek physician. And he tells the story that Digenes was at a smart dinner party and he felt the need to clear his mouth, to spit. And he sort of looked about himself, looked around the room, and then spat at his host. And his host, as you might imagine, was rather taken aback by this behaviour and queried it. And Digenes supposedly replied that all the walls are decorated with remarkable paintings. The floor is composed of expensive pebbles with likenesses of the gods, their bodies bright and clean. The couches are all decked out. It is the custom of men to spit into the least honourable of all places. That turned out to be the host. Okay, so this was the sort of scene, if you like, at one of these symposia. And as we understand it, respectable women did not attend these things. So the wives would not attend, but there might be paid entertainers, female entertainers, courtesans who could attend these. So when we see the men reclining on couches in the tomb of the diver, we have to imagine the tomb creating this sort of space. And while it's certainly the case that the deceased might be represented as one of the characters in the painting, perhaps that one who's leaving or arriving, or perhaps the diver himself, the deceased is also quite literally in the middle of this space. The corpse is laid out in the middle of this symposium. So the deceased is very much an active participant in it. Okay, so if we keep working our way around and move on to the long side, here I've given you a view of one of the long sides with some details as well. The guys on the couches in the middle here have their drinking cups in their hands. They're fairly typical black glazed cups for this type of period. And then we've also got some instruments here. Here is a lyre with this guy's holding, and over here we have somebody playing the aulos, another of those double flutes. And this guy's got his head on his hand and his sort of head thrown back. This is thought to be a gesture indicating singing. He's really belting it out here at the party. Now, again, we have some archaeological evidence of these sorts of instruments. This, for example, is part of an aulos that is at the Museum in Reading in the UK, and it dates to the 4th century, and it's made of bone and wood and bronze and silver. And then down below, you have a reconstruction of a musician figure from a very famous vase known as the Pronomos vase. And it has been reconstructed with this figure playing the Reading aulos. Now, this thing would have been extremely difficult to play, this double flute. It's not really quite like a flute, even though we often call it that. I had always heard it sounded more like bagpipes until fairly recently when I heard it being played, a reconstructed aulos being played at a conference. And it's not quite as raucous as the bagpipes. I would say it's somewhere in between a flute and the bagpipes. We also occasionally find rather better preserved evidence for those lyres. And here you're looking at a more or less complete tortoise shell, which still retains some of its metal attachments that would have been used to attach wooden sections and the strings to create that lyre. So again, this is probably what was contained in the tomb of the diver, and those tortoiseshell fragments probably relate to something like this. Now, that guy with the lyre has another interesting detail. If we look at him close up, you can see that he's holding something in his left hand. Now, what is it? Now, this is actually much debated, but one possibility is it an egg? Now, those who think it is an egg argue that it's not some kind of snack at the symposium. The snacks would have come a bit earlier in the proceedings before the drinking really started, but that it represents possible links with Orphism, which was a religious movement that had some rather attractive ideas of the afterlife. Primarily that the human soul was immortal, but was stuck in a cycle of reincarnation, but it was possible to escape this and go to the underworld and join the gods. And of course, it's related to Orpheus, the mythical poet who descended to the underworld and returned. Orpheus supposedly invented the mysteries of the god Dionysus, and followers of Orphism worshipped Persephone and Dionysus also. And of course, in mythology, the god Dionysus also did this business of going to the underworld and returning. So Dionysus is very much involved with all this. And in Orphic mythology, he was also reborn, despite being murdered by the primeval gods, the Titans. And of course, as I'm sure you know, Dionysus was also the god of wine. And in the 4th century BC, the philosopher Plato noted that the Orphic reward for good behaviour during life was that the dead would be taken down into the world below, where they have the saints lying on couches at a feast, everlastingly drunk, crowned with garlands. Their idea seems to be that an immortality of drunkenness is the highest praise of virtue. So there you are. Your reward in the afterlife as an Orphic was to be permanently drunk at a party, which sounds pretty good. And it must be said that everyone in the tomb of the diver is certainly having a good time. Now, we have some other archaeological evidence also that appears to relate to these Orphic beliefs. And it's in the form of gold tablets, which have been found in graves in southern Italy and elsewhere in the Greek world. And you're looking at one here from the Athenian settlement of Thurioi in southern Italy. They often, as here, contain instructions to the dead, what to do when you get to the underworld. And this one says, but as soon as the soul has left the light of the sun, go to the right, being careful of all things. Greetings, you have suffered the painful thing. You have never endured this before. You have become a god instead of a mortal, a kid you fell into milk. Rejoice, rejoice. Journey on the right-hand road to holy meadows and groves of Persephone. Now, another very interesting find, which is on the other left-hand side of the slide, is a lid of a tomb from Cumae, another Greek settlement in southern Italy, with an inscription on it that says, here it is forbidden to bury anyone who is not bebekumenon, and that means initiated into the cult of Dionysus. Now, an oddity of this tomb lid is that this inscription, when it was found, the inscription was supposedly on the inside of the lid, which is quite odd because it couldn't be read by anybody there. One would expect it to be on the outside. So there might be a mistake there, or else something very mysterious going on if it is on the inside. Now, also, a very unusual little object was found in a tomb at Metaponto, another Greek city in southern Italy. The tomb is known as the Tomb of Helen's Egg, and it dates to the late 5th century BC because it has just this little tiny ornament really in it, which, as you can see, shows some sort of human figure emerging from a broken egg. Now, of course, in mythology, Helen of Troy was born from an egg, hence the name Tomb of Helen's Egg, but it is possible there is a different sort of reference here, and that the egg is a symbol of rebirth. And in Orphism, there was the character of Phanes, who was a primeval deity of procreation and new life, and he was born from an egg with male and female characteristics. So is this egg depicted in the tomb of the diver a reference to this kind of Orphic idea, or something related to it, like Pythagoreanism, for example? Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with Pythagoras. We all had to learn about his hypotenuse in maths at school. But he was a philosopher who settled in southern Italy in the later part of the 6th century BC, and his ideas about the afterlife, which included personal salvation, seem to have a lot of parallels with Orphism, and Pythagoreans seem to have been a rather secretive, exclusive sect, which appealed particularly to local aristocrats. So we could ask ourselves, with all this imagery here, this egg and so forth, and the existence of these religious movements in southern Italy, is there something quite specific going on here with regard to ideas about the afterlife and perhaps some rather exclusive social groups? Or, given this guy is holding a lyre, is it just a plectrum? As is often pointed out, why should the guy with a lyre, who actually needs a plectrum, be holding an egg in his other hand? So it might in fact be a perfectly banal explanation. It's a plectrum so he can play the lyre. I'm going to let you decide that one for yourselves. There is no consensus on it yet in scholarship. Okay, let's keep on going around the tomb. So here we get to one of the other short sides where there is a nude serving attendant, and there's a table with a big garlanded vase. It's a crater. Garlands are the kind of party hat you'd wear as a wreath to a symposium. And that young man, that youth, is holding an oinokoi, a wine jug, which is painted in outline. And I'll give you a close-up here so you can just see it. Sometimes this is thought to be a sign that the tomb painting was done rather hastily and it wasn't in fact finished before the tomb was closed, because this is just in outline. But another suggestion, which I find more appealing, is that actually this reflects a different material of this jug, and it was possibly silver. And we know that if you were upmarket in antiquity, you didn't use so much of that pottery at your symposium, you would use metal vessels. But they rarely survive because they didn't often get put into tombs, and then they would get melted down in later centuries and recycled into something else. So we don't have many of them left. That big vase on the table might be bronze even, or ceramic, we can't really tell there. But it's also been pointed out that it is a very South Italian, in other words, indigenous South Italian shape with those funny looking handles. It's not really a purely Greek shape. But of course, as a crater, it would have been the centre of the symposium ritual. It was for mixing the wine with water, because the ancient Greeks on the whole didn't drink their wine neat, which is probably a good idea because ancient Greek wine was probably pretty rough stuff. And the symposiarch, if you like, the president of the evening, of the proceedings, would decide the ratios of wine to water, so essentially how fast everybody got drunk, and there would be rather elaborate toasts made and jokes and performances as the wine was passed around. So if we go on then to the other long side, here again, I've given you a close-up. We've got in the detail down the bottom here, this couple here who really look like they're sort of getting a bit fresh with each other. And it's important to remember that in antiquity, well, as far as we know from Athens, but probably elsewhere also, that what we would nowadays call a homosexual relationship was a bit different, and it was to some degree socially codified, particularly that of an elite relationship between an older man, the so-called Erastes, and the younger man, the Euronymos, which would be a fairly brief relationship, perhaps of a few years before the younger man got too old for this sort of relationship, because while it was a sexual relationship, it also involved a degree of education and mentoring on the part of the older man. It was definitely an asymmetrical relationship in that sense, and it would, with this mentoring process, also be preparation for the political and civic life of a Greek male citizen. And this is what made this sort of relationship socially acceptable and condoned. Other sorts of homosexual relationships were not condoned in this way. And you can see as these two are sort of, getting up close and personal with each other, this guy here is looking on with a lot of interest, which is just as well because his friend up here doesn't seem to be paying much attention to him at all, but is otherwise happily occupied. And if we go and have a look at what he's doing in more detail, you can see in his hand he's raising up his drinking cup by the handle, and he's kind of got this flicking gesture. He appears to be playing a game called Kottabos, which was a rather revolting ancient drinking game which involved flicking or spitting the dregs of the wine at a target. Now, what was the target, you may well ask? It could be anything. It could be any point or object in the room. You could get a slave to stand still and use the slave as the target if you wanted to. But there were actually also purpose-made Kottabos targets. And here I'm going to show you a fragment of a crater from the Trendall collection, which shows a satyr, one of the followers of Dionysus, off to a party with a Kottabos stand over his shoulder. And it's essentially a pole with a thin metal disc on it, which would obviously shake and be terribly obvious when a glob of wine dregs landed on it. So this is the sort of thing that might be used at a party, at a symposium. And the other sort of thing you might have at a symposium is something else that is in the Trendall Centre, and that is a South Italian fish plate, so called because it's got fish on it, and this one dates to the 4th century. Now, most of our known fish plates were made in southern Italy. There are some from Athens as well. And we have some evidence, it's very tenuous evidence, but there's some evidence that these plates could be used also as targets in this Kottabos game. They could be floated. They're sort of actually quite hollow underneath, so they could be floated in perhaps a big tub of water. It looked like the fish were swimming around. And again, when a glob of wine dregs hit them, they'd wobble and perhaps sink. It's a nice idea. The evidence, though, is very tenuous, but it is certainly fair to say that they would have been used for the snacks at these parties. We assume they were used for serving small fish or pieces of fish, and they always have that depression in the middle for perhaps a dipping sauce or the juices or something like that. And fish was a great delicacy in antiquity. Now, if we go back to that long side, the guy at the end is holding out his drinking cup. He's perhaps admiring it or more likely calling for more wine. And this might result in his case in what was almost inevitable at the Greek symposium, and that is that you would leave much the worse for wear. And often we get this depicted quite clearly in ancient Greek vases. This is one of my favourite ones. It's a red figure vase dating to the 5th century. And it shows a couple in the centre. It's in the tondo, which is it's illustration, it's circular illustration in the bottom of the drinking cup. Often when I show this to my students, I say, well, what do you think is going on here? And they come all sorts of high-flown things. Is it a religious ceremony? They're getting married, whatever. Da, da, da. No. Look more closely at what is coming out of the man's mouth. He is being sick. He is throwing up. And the female on the other side is kindly helping him out and holding his head. And she is not his wife. And we can be quite clear about that on a number of grounds. First of all, both characters have got those wreaths on their heads. So they've obviously both been to a symposium. As I said, we don't think respectable wives did that. She also has short blonde or red hair. That indicates she is a foreigner and therefore most likely to be a slave. So she's probably one of these paid female entertainers, these courtesans. They've been at the symposium. They're out in the street now because they're both dressed. And again, he's got his outdoor clothes on and he is throwing up in the gutter. And she is helping him out. Now, we actually have quite a lot of these vomiting scenes from ancient Greek vases. And we get a sense here of the ancient Greek sense of humour. If you imagine this is in the bottom of the drinking cup, as you drink the wine, as that image goes down, as the wine goes down, exposing that image, you will see what might happen to you on the way home. So this is the hysterically funny ancient Greek sense of humour. So putting all this together, we get the whole kind of symposium scene. Most of our symposium scenes on vases comes from Athens, but this is one from southern Italy also. And here we have the whole kit and caboodle. There is the young naked serving guy. There is the kottabos stand. Here are the men, the participants on their couches. Somebody's playing the double flute there. There's a lyre hanging up here. There's the tables with all the sort of debris from the party. And here is a courtesan doing what she's being paid to do. So we've now come full circle with this term, and we're back to where we started. Is this character here leaving? Is he departing his friends in life? We hope he's not heading out the door to be sick. Or is he arriving? Is he joining his friends who have passed on already at some kind of funerary banquet? And here we get back to the deceased. Who was he? And this is quite a mystery. The tomb is basically a Greek style of tomb, apart from the painting, in a Greek cemetery at a Greek site. But there are a lot of features of this grave which are not quite so Greek. One is that crater that looks more indigenous southern Italian. The symposium scene we're familiar with from ancient Greek vases, and in some ways it looks like a vase painting, the way the figures are strung out there, but not in a tomb. The Greeks did not normally paint their tombs at this period. And in fact, in this sense, there are actually closer parallels with this tomb from further north with the Etruscans in Italy, who might paint this kind of thing. This is the tomb of the Leopards from Tarquinia, dates to around the same period. And here you have the Etruscan version of the Greek symposium. Women were allowed to come to these. The Etruscan women seem to have had a lot more freedom. But this painting of the interior of the tomb with this kind of funerary banquet scene is a much more Etruscan thing to do. Now, we do know that the Etruscans had a lot of contact and cultural exchange with the Greeks, and that there was an Etruscan presence in this part of Italy, in Campania, certainly from the 6th century onwards. So we could be looking at some kind of updated version of an Etruscan funeral feast in the tomb of the diver. But, you know, it's still immensely complicated. We're still quite a long way south. This thing is still very unusual. And, of course, the Greek cities in Italy and Sicily came into contact with their local populations, and there was probably extensive cohabitation and intermarriage. And that might be what we're seeing reflected here. In other words, perhaps not some single ethnic identity, Etruscan or local Italian or Greek or whatever, but a whole mixture of cultural motifs. Now, one reason why I sort of say this is that I'm not sure, despite lots of attempts to identify the ethnic identity of this individual, is he Greek, is he local Italian, is he Etruscan, whatever, I'm not sure that's the aim of this tomb. I spend a lot of time looking at ancient cemeteries in this part of the world, and the thing that often strikes me about these cemeteries is that very often, where you've got hundreds, even thousands of graves at these sites, there's always one or maybe a handful of graves that just stick out like sore thumbs. They do not fit in with the overall pattern. They're very different, and this difference draws a line between the occupants of that tomb or tombs and everybody else in the cemetery at the site. And these tombs are often more expensive, as in this case. That painting would have taken there would have been some cost factor to it. And they're certainly also very different, as here. And in creating this difference, they're often drawing on design features and burial methods or motifs or objects that are drawn from a whole range of different ethnic and cultural contexts. But they're individually always relatively expensive and relatively elite. So you kind of end up with this kind of concoction in a particular grave that draws upon, if you like, all the best bits of surrounding cultures. And it's really distinctive and elite in anybody's language. The fact that very few people get these kind of tombs might suggest there's something more than just loads of cash behind it. There might have been some other sort of social qualifications, some very particular status, although we might never know what that is. In this context, though, we must not forget the lid. And this really poses the big question: what is the significance of that diver and his plunge into the pool below? We do not have much evidence for Greeks and water sports. They were into athletics generally, but swimming, diving does not appear to have been a thing in the ancient world. So we're probably looking at some kind of different symbol here, not about sport, but maybe about the plunge from life into death, from the known into the world of the unknown. It's sometimes suggested, for example, that this guy is leaping from the Pillars of Hercules, otherwise known as the Rock of Gibraltar, the edge of the known world. Again, we can go back to that question I raised earlier. Is there some connection with orphism? Maybe, but one of our problems is that we don't have a clear image of any sort of pattern in Orphic tombs. We sometimes get those gold tablets. There might be other motifs, but there's no obvious way of constructing a grave for somebody who adhered to Orphism. And then we've also got to wonder precisely what is the link between the lid and the symposium scene. There's clearly some message or set of references there that we're really not quite getting, but I think we have to conclude that the occupant of this tomb must have been in some way distinctive, in some way special, to have got a tomb like this. And he is not the only luminary to have found his final resting place. at Peaston. And here I'll get back to Dale Trendle. Such was his fondness, Trendle's fondness for the site of Peaston, that at his request, after he died, a portion of his ashes was scattered at Peaston. So if you've never been to Peaston, Poseidonia, I do hope you'll go one day and see the tomb of the diver. It's displayed in the museum across the road from the site. And think not just of the occupant of the tomb of the diver basking under the southern Italian sun there, but also of Dale Trendle. Thank you very much.
Thank you there, Gillian. Thank you there, Gillian, for that presentation. Costa, we are getting some echoing. Okay. Yes,
there's nothing I can do about that echo, Nick.
Okay. Thank you once again. Okay. And apologies for the echoing. We'll just check if we got a few questions coming in. In those scenes with the men there lying on couches, there were some pillows there. Do we know what they were made of? What type of animal hides, and what would they be using as the stuffing?
They're probably fabric, and they would have been woven from something like probably linen. They might have been wool, but linen's fairly tough and hard wearing. Cotton is all barely known in the ancient world. It did exist, but not in this period, probably. So they're probably made of something like linen, and stuffed with, well, all sorts of manner of things. You could stuff them with wool. You could stuff them with hay. I'm not sure if the ancient Greeks had kapok, which is, of course, from that plant, which is often used as stuffing also. But you might have also noticed that some of them, the fabrics there, the textiles are painted in blue also. And that might be another indication of, I suppose, wealth in some sense, because blue is quite a hard colour to produce both in dyes for textiles, but also even in paint, because it has to be artificially produced. Those other more neutral colours are naturally produced ochres and things like that, or of course in dyeing you can use onion skins, easy enough to get it a browny colour, but these artificially produced colours, blue, are much more complicated and are often a sign of some degree of expenditure and wealth, as is still the case today. You know, if you go to an artist's shop and buy paints individually, they have individual prices on them, and blue is still one of the most expensive colours. Does give us a good idea, as do vase paintings, into the furniture and the soft furnishings really as well, in an ancient Greek domestic context.
And the city of Poseidonia itself, is it a port city or is it slightly inland?
It's now more inland than it used to be. The coastline has moved, and although the city itself was not right on the coast, it did, we believe, have a port. I mean, you would expect it to with a name like that, Poseidon being the god of the sea. And it's assumed that it did do very well, that a lot of its prosperity was as a result of seaborne trade.
Also, if it was a port city, isn't there a possibility that, let's say, diving activities could have been part of sporting festivals or something like that? So, being a port city,
you would think so, yeah. But of course, the Greeks were always very engaged with the sea, seafaring, fishing, you know, all that sort of stuff, mercantile activities. But no, as far as we can see, not into swimming at all. We really don't hear about it. One would have expected people who had to swim could. I mean, you get, unless you do today, sponge divers, pearl divers. One would like to think that sailors could swim, but that doesn't seem to have been the case, and we know, even in medieval times with the wreck of the Mary Rose, the sailors drowned. So yeah, we really don't have much evidence for it at all. To be a thing. And again, it's also not something we get illustrated anywhere else on vases or anything like that. But we hear a lot about, all the other sports, the wrestling, the chariot racing, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And in the artwork there, but not just that artwork, but nearly all ancient Greek artwork, the men are always sort of really well-toned, muscular. No one is too thin. No one is obese. Is that just an artistic style, or?
Yeah, it's kind of ancient Greek airbrushing, I suppose. You get this throughout Greek art in this period. The figures are naturalistic. You get to see this in sculpture and vase painting as well as this wall painting. Really, since the 7th and 6th centuries, Greek artists have been working towards increased naturalism, but it's accompanied by idealism. We don't get realism until later on in the sort of Hellenistic period, where you get a more warts and all approach. But you get these highly idealized images of essentially perfect-looking young adults. And that is, I suppose, a celebration of the body beautiful and the importance in Greek culture of that. And, of course, elite men would work out in the gymnasium and everything else. But it does present in some ways this sort of slightly skewed image of society, because we don't often see old people or young people. Children are often conspicuously absent as well from these images. And, let's face it, not every...
I think I saw a muscular old man in one of those photos. So.
Might have been the odd one, yeah. Yes, it's definitely making people look as good as they can, yeah.
Okay. I've just got a question here from Savas, but it's probably not specific enough. Like, we hear a lot of assumptions regarding the ancient Greeks. How much evidence actually exists about many of these assumptions? But I'm not too sure which assumptions specifically he's referring to.
Okay. Well, let me. I'll just say that a lot of them are pretty. Normally, we like to flag it up if it's not well established. So a lot of the things that you hear people saying, but that's what I've said this evening, are based on pretty extensive evidence, not necessarily in terms of in-depth discussions about what the Greeks did in everyday life, because on the whole, one of our problems with things like our ancient texts is that they tend to talk about the really big events like the battles, or the things that are unusual in some way. That's why they're worth writing about. They don't describe anything sort of terribly so banal as, I don't know, getting ready to go to the symposium or something like that. But we often have tangential references or a whole lot of, if you like, passing references that are sufficiently consistent in what they're referring to, that we can assume some benchmark level of behaviour, something like that. Now, it's also worth remembering, though, how much of this stuff comes out of Athens. Athens produces a lot of stuff. That's material culture, the painted vases and so on, but also writing. It is a highly literate society, relatively highly literate for the ancient world. So we do also have to be a bit careful about thinking, well, is what went on in ancient Athens the same as what went on everywhere else? Can we extrapolate that? And that's a bit tricky. And sometimes I think the more you look at ancient Athens, the odder it gets. I mean, not everywhere else was quite like that. Athens was clearly quite a special place.
Definitely. A lot happened during that short period of time, that golden age. And yeah. Okay, I think we might bring proceedings to a close. Don't have any sort of further questions here. Thanks for your time, Gillian.
Pleasure.
We would like to host you at the Greek Centre sometime in the near or distant future, depending how circumstances evolve. It's nice having you and finally getting this first talk out of the way. So
Yes.
I'm sure the next one will be easier. And so.
Well, thank you very much. And yes, it would be lovely to come to the Greek Centre sometime. And yeah, when we're back to normal.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks once again, and hope you'll all be tuning next Thursday as well. Thank you.